I will start again. The chair is unwell, so he's not here, so I will be chairing the meeting in his absence. So welcome everyone to the Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting. This is the first of two meetings, so the meeting was due to start at 2 p.m, but obviously because the Chief Executive's been held up, we are giving him a few more minutes to get here. So while we wait, I will go straight into the do we need to do housekeeping?
Yes.
We do. Okay, so if I hand over to Mr. Harrod to do housekeeping, because we do have some members of the public here.
Yes, good afternoon, members, officers and members of the public. Just some housekeeping. Please note that this Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the website in due course. Please could I therefore remind members and officers to use their microphones when speaking. The meeting may also be audio recording and or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests, so if the alarm does go off, please leave through the emergency exit at the back of the room and assemble at the front of the building by the public toilets. Finally, please could mobile phones be turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. I now turn to Lindsay for the next two items, which is apologies and substitute members. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Apologies have been received today from the Chairman, Councillor Philip Broadhead, and also Councillors Mike Green, Nicola Green, Mohan Iyengar and Councillor Miles, which leads us on to item 2, substitute members. We've received notification from the appropriate group leader that Councillor Dwayne Farr will be substituting for Councillor Iyengar.
Thank you for that. The next item on our agenda is declarations of interest. So, members, do we have any interest we wish to declare for the 2 o'clock meeting? Okay, I take that there is none, but if you do find as we progress through the meeting that you do have an item of declaration you wish to make, you can do it at that point. Our next item is the action sheet, which is actually included in your agenda under item 4. So, members, do we have any comments on the matters arising, or the action sheet rather? Anyone got any comments to make, they wish to make? No? Okay. Yeah, so are we content to agree the action sheet? Yes, agreed? Agreed? Okay, thank you, members. So our next item is public speaking. We have had no notification of public questions, public statements, and no notification of any petitions to be submitted. So I move on to the next item, which is Chairman's update. There isn't really any update as such. It's just to make members aware that at our next meeting, which is at 6 p.m, we will be taking an additional item, which is to do with an update on the situation, the emerging situation with the coronavirus, but that will be at the later meeting. I think the chairman had actually sent notification to all members to say that that was happening. And also to say that potentially, because one item on this agenda, which is under agenda item 9, the first item, which is BCP Council parking charges harmonisation, that item's now no longer going to be heard. And the explanation for that is that it is actually just the inflationary rise for parking charges, which will be dealt with under officers' delegated powers. The harmonisation part of parking charges will actually be coming to a later overview and scrutiny meeting. So therefore, we do actually have a much shorter agenda than anticipated from when the meeting was agenda was first put together. So I expect that famous last words, the meeting might actually finish slightly earlier than anticipated. But we are unfortunately not able to bring the 6 o'clock meeting forward because it was published to start at 6, so we will have to start that meeting at 6 p.m. So now we move on to the next item, which is the forward plan. And as part of this, members will recall, those who were here at the last meeting, that the chairman had agreed to set up a working group to review the accommodation strategy. So Ms. Marshall will actually give us an update because the working group did meet last week, so she will give us now an update of what took place.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a brief update to let you know that that working group that you agreed at your last meeting met last week. The membership is Councillor Broadhead, Councillor Haynes and Councillor Farquhar, who were in attendance. And all members of the board will have seen the scope for that group circulated to them by email beforehand. So the scope was agreed at that first meeting, and some detailed work to look into the methodology and sort of have a full understanding of the detail behind the cabinet report that you scrutinised on the estate strategy at the previous meeting. That work was done at the working group last week, and there's been some discussion by the working group about any potential future role for ONS in that work. So there's a plan for another meeting to take place in April, but obviously we'll just watch and see about when that and how that next working group meeting might be able to take place so that it can feed into the work timeline. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. And so now we go on to the substantive part of this item, which is the forward plan. I think before we start looking at it, is to say that obviously things are changing on a daily basis, and that this is just an indicative schedule of what the meetings are that are planned, but obviously all items on this or the dates of the meetings are all subject to change depending on what happens with the current situation with the coronavirus. So it's just to say if any members have any comments, I would welcome them, but it's just to make a point that actually this is obviously subject to change. Do we have any comments?
Can we delegate authority to the Chair and Vice Chair to agree?
Okay, so there's been a suggestion from Ms. Marshall that in the absence of any comments from members of the board, would you therefore be content that if there are any changes, that you would be content to delegate that to the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee to then sort out the agendas for forthcoming meetings? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just having another look through this, and I think that unless something substantial has happened to the Folkestone station lifts before July this year, I think we should have an update report to this panel just to tell us that nothing has happened or what's happening. I think we need to keep on top of the Folkestone list, and I'm sure that Councillor Jones would like me to progress that.
You, that's noted. Thank you for that point. Any other comments? No? Okay. So taking into account Councillor Anderson's point, our members can tend to therefore delegate to Chair and Vice Chair to deal with the agenda as and when things unfold on the Cabinet Forward Plan. Are we agreed on that? Okay. Thank you very much, members. So we now move on to the main agenda items. The first item is under confidential, so we will have to move to exclude the press and public from the meeting for the duration of this following item. So while I read out the relevant section that states this, if I could ask any members of the public press to please leave the room. We will tell you when it's safe to return. So, that under Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that in the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. Okay, so members, so that concludes item 8, which is under confidential. So we can actually now move back to public business. If I could ask Mr. Poultney, could you tell the people they can come back in now as you're on your way out? Thank you.
So are we going to ask Andy Hadley to say anything here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, if he wants to make a comment, if he doesn't, then I've already said something. Just ask him to make a comment.
Give a bit more background
Yeah.
to it first.
So, anyone else? Okay, right. We're now back in the public business section. So we are now moving on to item 9. If I could invite Councillor Hadley to come to the desk. Thank you, Councillor Hadley. I understand that there are 2 items listed under number 9 for transportation, but perhaps you might wish to comment on that first item, which is the BCP Council parking charges harmonisation, which I understand has been slightly mislabelled, but that is also not actually going to be subject to scrutiny today. So would you like to make some comment before we move on to the substantive item?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you. Yes, so members will be aware that we are looking at a number of things in terms of parking at the moment. One is a parking SPD, and I understand the plan for that will be considered by Cabinet probably in April. The second is harmonisation of parking charges across the area. A paper was prepared but wasn't felt to be ready to bring to Cabinet, so that will come to a future Cabinet, probably not April, probably more likely June.
Okay, thank you for that. Any members wish to make any comment on that before we move on to the main item? Okay, right, we'll move on to the main item here, which is the Street Works Permitting Scheme. Councillor Hadley?
So this is a statutory requirement upon all councils to have a mechanism for controlling streetworks on the highway to try and reduce congestion and disruption to the members of the public. And it involves us in receiving permits, taking a charge to administer those. We anticipate that we'd need 6 staff to administer this in the first place, although I think the provision is for up to 9. All of the statutory undertaking companies have been consulted with. They've come back with comments, and we've adjusted the scheme based on their comments. So this paper summarises that and where we're up to with that.
Thank you. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously congestion is one of the big issues in the conurbation, and it's so frustrating when you're travelling across it, and there have been sort of roadworks that don't seem to align up geographically and in time as well. So I'm pleased to see that this scheme does address that, and it will be part of the solution in making traffic flow, and also that the consultees really welcomed it collectively, and they are keen to work together to reduce their costs. But I just wanted to get a bit more information about the max charge applying to all roads, because of course the consultees were quite disappointed. It said on the BCP's response was nearly all the streets network can be strategically significant at times, but I'm thinking of things like cul-de-sacs and those quiet residential roads that don't really go anywhere. So can you give me a bit more information on the thinking behind that, please?
Thank you. Yes, I think cul-de-sacs probably are the exception. They're certainly the exception I could think of, but and it's actually a bit of a problem with the layout of our network. Partly historic reasons, because Bournemouth and Christchurch are in separate counties, and the roads don't really join up. But certainly, if you travel east-west across the conurbation, you're likely to be on one of about 4 different routes through Poole. whereas you might have been on the Wessex Way in Bournemouth. It's a recognition actually that our network is pretty at capacity, and that when we get problems on the network, or like the sewer repair on Ringwood Road, that many other roads lock up because they are very busy. So the impact across the network of any change pretty much anywhere is going to be fairly widespread. I guess we could have excluded cul-de-sacs from the scheme, but it was easier just to say it's everywhere. Obviously, as I said, this is a national statutory requirement for us to have these schemes, and that's part of why the utility companies were comfortable with what we were trying to do in total. I think in other places, perhaps where they've got a much more strategic network, it was easier for them to say it's these roads and not these other roads.
Thank you, and also thank you for including the definition of terms in the appendix, because otherwise I'd have been absolutely lost throughout. So thanks.
Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Earl, for got the points which I wanted. Can you just expand a little bit as regards, because I know one of the frustrations to the public is no sooner than we lay a new bit of tarmac on a pavement for safer access for disability vehicles, etc., then it appears that 2 weeks later, then an operator turns up, digs it up, puts a pipe in, and then does a shoddy sort of repair to that nice pavement. Can you just expand on the opportunities here to actually schedule work so that we only dig a hole once for a variety of utilities rather than dig a hole and then dig a hole and then dig a hole?
Certainly, there is a discount for suppliers to work together. So the utility companies can save, I think it's 30% for effectively if they're working alongside another utility. We have to have a lead party for that, so one of them has to step forward as the prime organisation. But there is a discount to try and encourage them to work together, where it's operationally sensible for them to do so. Obviously, sometimes when water and electricity don't mix too well, so having them in the same hole, they need to be compatible in terms of what they're trying to achieve and the timescales and the overruns as well, and who's responsible for that. So it does get more complicated having more than one company working in the same space. But the other bit of that is that we have more control, perhaps through the permit scheme, of knowing who actually dug the hole, and if they don't repair it to an adequate standard, being able to chase them down to make sure that they're dealing with that. And I think that's also a role that the inspections will allow us to better control shoddy outcomes in terms of restoring the carriageway.
Thank you very much, Chair. I really appreciate that, because this is an issue whereby subcontractors, etc., do not come up to the same level of standard as we expect, and who says what piece of tarmac and who put it down at what time. So can we just get the reassurance that we will have the inspection teams will go out and inspect to a certain standard, if I may, Chair, that it is up to grade, and if not, then nip it in the bud and get it corrected sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Farquhar. I do agree with the point you've made, because I think with this permit scheme, as Councillor Hadley has outlined, it's none of this, well, they did it, no, they did it, and then no one owns up to it. And at the end of the day, if it's a serious problem, invariably the council sometimes ends up having to pick up the bill, which isn't really fair on us. So we're going to the next speaker, which is Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I very much welcome the scheme. It's something that when I chaired the Environment and Economy Committee in Bournemouth Council, I was pushing for, so I'm glad to see it's finally coming to fruition. I also wanted to pick up on the comment that Councillor Farquhar said about the reinstatement of the roads. I know we've had problems in the past where we've gone out and the inspectors have checked the road after the job's been done, but they haven't gone back and checked it in sort of 4 weeks, 6 weeks after the road has settled. So we have dips in the road where the tarmac that's been put on and the road hasn't been compacted correctly. Can you assure me, first of all, that the inspectors will be going back not only after the job's been finished, but at a later period to make sure that there hasn't been any settling? And the other two things I wanted to pick up on were I may have missed it, but I couldn't see in here anything about overrun fines and how punitively they're going to be. And the other one I wanted to pick up on was I couldn't see anything. There was some talk about having giving a discount for working in. I think the word was less busy times, But I would like to see that we can offer a discount for people who work antisocial times, such as late at night or overnight when the traffic is much less on the roads.
Thank you. There's quite a bit in there. So just taking that last point, the working outside of key times, that was what was called traffic sensitive routes. So that's the principal routes. Because obviously on residential routes, actually, if you're pneumatic drilling the street at night, then that's going to be of a problem to householders. So not welcomed. So it does talk about that in terms of the. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, 17.2, action by permit authority, including fixed penalty notices, etc.
Yeah, so it doesn't actually say that. That doesn't actually say the costs. So I'll have to get back to you on what the costs of that are. Yeah. Okay.
And then about the overrun.
Yeah, so the overruns, they would be subject to a fixed penalty notice. In terms of the 4 weeks later, was the other bit that you mentioned, the sort of the subsequent subsidence. We have an inspection regime, so our street scene team go around inspecting the highway on a regular basis. They do it on a different level. It's actually not in my department; it's in Environmental Services, but they do it on a more regular basis on the major roads, but they do go around to all of the routes and notify the defects and pick them up. How we make sure that the original contractor pays for that again 4 weeks later or 6 months later is probably more difficult than an immediate inspection and immediate defective work, I suspect.
Thank you for that, and it does give me some assurance. But one of the biggest problems we've had, as Councillor Farquhar mentioned, about the people digging out the road and then redigging it up, has been that you look at the road after a couple of weeks and it's all fine, and it slowly starts to subside, and then we don't know who's done it, and it's that part, because I mean I can name you sort of a dozen roads or more across the conurbation where we know the gas people have done it, or the water people have done it, or the electricity people have dug up the road, and it all looked lovely, but they've used a lower grade of tarmac, and it looks fine for the first couple of weeks, and then a month later, 2 months later, you see it started to subside, and it's that I think we really need to crack down on, and that's one of the things I'd like to see your inspectors go back and rechecking. If they know that a piece of work has been done on this road, then they have a calendar where even if they just drive over it to see that there's been no change in the road surface. I think that would be useful. Even if they don't physically inspect it, they can then send someone else out to check it. But we do need to have something that does that.
If I may, Chair, I think that's probably where they'll need to work with ward councillors. So rather than them going around to check for 6 months every hole that's been dug, that they will be a resource that you could say, hang on a minute, this has recurred, to get them out to do that work. So I think we will have to rely on a partnership in terms of achieving that. Otherwise, they'd be spending all their time looking at old holes rather than the new ones.
In that case, Chairman, we are going to need to have some sort of notification going by office to councillors saying that these roadworks are going on in your ward, which we don't at the moment.
I'll have to take that one away. I'm sorry, I can't promise that without.
We have got that.
Okay, before I go on to the next speaker, which is Councillor Bartlett, so just following on from the points that both Councillor Farquhar and Councillor Anderson have just made, is there anything in the permit scheme that says that once the work is completed, that therefore any making good would therefore last for a period of X? So say, I don't know, the bane of my life, SGN, go and dig up a hole, and then they're there for 6 months when they're supposed to be for 3, then the work's all completed, they make good. Is that it? As in, if, as Councillor Anderson was saying, because of settlement, you find that actually the hole then becomes a dip, or there's a bump, or something not quite right with it, do we have any real recourse to say, can you come and sort this out? Or because they've already made good in the first instance, it's therefore no longer their responsibility? I wonder if either yourself, Councillor Hadley, or Mr. Cotton might be able to clarify that.
There's nothing in the report. It's a good question, Chair. I think there is a point to which how long can we expect them to do it? It might have been subsidence from other cause, an underground stream or something else, or something that they've disturbed. So I think we'd need to take that away as what is the reasonable time, and is there a change that we can make?
Thank you for that. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, this has just reminded me when about half of the pavements in the town of Bournemouth were decimated by the installation of City Fibre, I think it was, or Fibre City, I can't remember which way round it was, or 9X or whoever, and our pavements never ever recovered from it. They are in a dreadful state generally. So, whatever we do now, this new permit scheme has got to somehow prevent that from happening again. But anyway, that wasn't that's just a statement. I mean, the question is about the approved scale of fees on paragraph 16.6. It says the current approved scale of fees is included in the local order for the permit authority to operate the permit scheme. Does that presumably that local order doesn't exist yet?
So if you turn to appendix.
Well, that talks about an average fee.
Yes.
Where it says the average fee is £77, but that's just really to sort of work out what the total income and cost of the scheme is going to be. But is there actually a schedule of fees that exists at the moment?
I'm afraid I don't have that to hand.
Oh, okay. I don't know how relevant it is because the fees could change hugely depending on the scale of the work that's being done. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it'll be for courses. For courses, that'll be charged by the amount of disruption, the size. Sorry. Yes, it'll be charged by the size of the works and the duration of them as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Farquhar?
Thank you, Chair. I feel a recommendation coming on here is necessary, along the lines of that not only does the permit scheme have to have within the software or the schedule of works an immediate inspection a week after, but there must also be, let's say, 12 weeks after, a follow-up inspection, because I'm quite alarmed and that the use of shoddy materials. An example is in my own ward, for accessibility to lead down to Southbourne High Street. Both sides of the pavement were brought up to very high standards so mobility vehicles can move up and down there. Now, 3.5 years on, it's like a roller coaster ride. So my recommendation is this, that we recommend that the paper has added that there's an initial inspection as part of the schedule of the permit scheme, a follow-up inspection at 12 weeks, and a penalty should shoddy materials be found to be at fault, recycling of materials. But there may also be a carrot and stick whereby if they use proper materials or recycled materials which actually bring it up to standard, then there may be a discount for using materials which are recycled from the environmental side of things, because you dig a hole, you've got tarmac, you've got some loose soil, you've got substrate and the variety of bits and pieces. Now, I know that a lot of countries are actually working on actually processing these materials and actually then having them as a source of fix. There's also a lot of European countries that are actually using plastics as the tarmac fixes for potholes and the like. So there might well be an incentivizer there, as well as the stick, to actually say to contractors and utility providers that you have to come up to grade because you will be inspected at 12 weeks. And if you're not, if there's a dip, then you will be charged for the investigation works and you will be expected to make good. So I'm thinking the recommendation should be coming on here, Chair, and I'd appreciate a seconder.
You, Councillor Anderson?
I was going to also make a recommendation on the similar sort of. I was going to make a recommendation on broadly similar sort of lines. I was going to suggest that we actually asked that Councillor Hadley and Mr. Cotton came back at some future date to give us an update on the comments that Councillor Haynes had made about the insurance and the length of time we were expecting the works to last. But I broadly support the comments that Councillor Farquhar has made about the infrastructure and the inspection. That's always been one of my biggest concerns, and it's one of the things I regularly were bringing up with officers. So I'm quite happy to support a general terms that we ask for some sort of inspection. I would like that we, rather than be prescriptive in the times that are required for them to inspect. I think we leave it for them to come up with, and maybe come back to us and report back at a future meeting when they are proposing to do it.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Can I therefore seek some clarification either from Councillor Hadley or Mr. Cotton to say, okay, currently the permit scheme hasn't been implemented yet, and I think, is it June it's meant to be implemented? So therefore, we do have a bit of time to actually make any amendments. Now, if we were to, which I think is eminently sensible, given the discussion from board members, that we say to the utility companies, and just a generalisation here, that even though you've made good the road surface or the pavement, or I think some people say footway, that's not where it ends. So therefore, if subsequently at a future date, whatever that future date might be, it's found that it's substandard and therefore the work needs to be redone, is that something that we are actually able to put in as part of the permit? I mean, that's something we as a board would like to see, and I think in general terms that's what the recommendation to Cabinet will say. Obviously, it's something that I think most ward councillors is the bane of their life when, a road gets dug up and they get complaints because either people can't park outside their house or businesses are affected, and the list goes on. So whether you might be able to give some clarification as to whether, if we did put that recommendation in, would you need to reconsult?
Once we've had the recommendation from yourselves, we'll obviously look at that carefully, and hopefully should we have time to respond before it goes to Cabinet, which is later on this week, and we should be able to make a response then. I think, to be honest, it'll all depend on if there are any significant cost implications of that recommendation. We'll have to, if that in turn would influence the amount of fee, we probably would have to reconsult, but we'll have a look at it and have our answer ready for the Cabinet meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett, before we go.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm sort of slightly troubled about the scale of fees and the approval of it. I don't know if they would have to be approved at a later date, but the notion to approve the policy without understanding what the range of fees are likely to be doesn't seem to be quite ringing right with me. I mean, what's reasonable, what's not unreasonable. Everyone will be subjected to these fees. A private person who wants a hole dug out in the road is going to have to pay a fee for the work to be done. So I think it's not unreasonable to have some understanding what the fees are likely to be. So I think there does, I'm not sure if there's a separate approval process for the scale of fees, or is that something that's dealt with by officers or the Cabinet or the Council, or, at what point do the scale of fees actually get approved?
So obviously the estimate is based on the average size of hole or average size of the works, and some of those can be very large. They have to be on a single street, so if it's multi-street, then it's multiple applications. So it's £77. So an individual householder, it's going to be presumably significantly less than £77 in order to account for Southern Gas Network digging up a whole road. I would think that absolutely, as part of enacting it in June, there's going to have to be the schedule of charges, but I would think that also is something that we will have to keep under review and probably annually change, which is probably why it's not in this report.
Chair, I'm sorry, I don't want to be pedantic here, but I still think we need some understanding of what the scale might be. Top limit, bottom limit. I think the average fee here is set there in order to work out what the cost of the authority is likely to be in order to staff it properly. But that might not necessarily reflect on what the scale of fees will actually be. It's possible potentially you might have one job that's £1,000. You might have another one that's only £10. There's no scale to it at all at the moment. So I don't think it needs to be.
If I can answer, Chair, I think that's a good observation. We'll make sure we have that information ready for the Cabinet meeting later this week.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just picking up on the same theme, and there probably isn't a solution to it. But the calculations that have been done are covering the implementation cost, basically, of having to employ more members of staff. So any inspection activity has got to be additional to that. Consequently, that must be reflected in the scale of charges at some point, which I think is one of the reasons why Councillor Bartlett is wanting more clarification. But I welcome the scheme, because I think we would all welcome a much better scheduling of works and knowing where the works are, and knowing that there are time limits for jobs to be done, and we don't see holes left in the road for several days with no workmen there, as often appears to be the case. So I'm happy with that. I'm also reasonably supportive of the recommendation that's going forward, but we do need to be aware of the costs that recommendation is likely to incur on top of what is currently appears to be a self-contained scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. There was a recommendation put forward by Councillor Farquhar, which I think, Councillor Anderson, you were willing to second.
Chairman, if I may. The comment that I didn't like the 12 weeks. I wanted it to be sort of more general and in consultation with the portfolio holder and the officer responsible.
So, Mrs. Marshall, could you help us with a formal wording, please?
Can I just have 1 moment just to discuss it?
Yes, certainly. Right, time out, 2 minutes. Okay, members, we have a recommendation which I will read out to you. Recommend to Cabinet that the Street Works Permitting Scheme be modified to include a clause that requires that any work undertaken are subject to follow-up inspection and a requirement to make good the road surface or footway to a sufficient standard in order to ensure that this standard remains in place for an agreed period of time. Comments? Or are we happy to support that? Okay, so on that basis, Councillor Farquhar, would you be happy to propose that recommendation? Yes. And Councillor Anderson, you're happy to second. Okay, so we have a recommendation duly proposed and seconded. So, board members, are we those who are happy to support the recommendation? Please indicate. Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you, members. Okay, I think that concludes that item. Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Thank you, Mr. Cotton. Okay, members, so we are now going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Heathlands SPD. Now, early this morning, Mr. Harrod had sent out a slight addendum, which I'm hoping that all members had actually seen and hopefully had time to actually look at. Can I confirm that you've all seen it? Or you've all at least had... Otherwise, there are paper copies, which the addendum that Mr. Harrod sent out this morning. Yes, the Merrick estate, yes. Yes? Yes? We're all aware of that. We've all had sight of it. Yes?
Thank you.
Okay, right. We'll go straight into the item then. So, the Heathlands SPD, Councillor Phipps, if I can hand it over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, members. Okay, well, I think you'll know that this SPD went out to consultation in February. It is essential that the Council maintains a planning framework for mitigating the impact on the Dorset Heathlands from development within a 5-kilometre range. And the current supplementary planning document that we have in place, because there is a legacy document, it actually runs out on the 31st of March. So we need this new document to be in place from the 1st of April. It is prepared jointly with Dorset Council and it covers 5 years from 2020 to 2025. The mitigation strategy is in 2 parts. First, there are what are called SAMs, that's Strategic Access Management and Monitoring. This includes such things as wardening or having a presence in organisations, visiting them, such as schools, basically making people aware of the importance of protecting and respecting our heathlands. And the second strategy are what are called HIPs, Heathland Infrastructure Projects. This is where, for large developments, other areas can be provided as alternatives so that people can go and use other areas instead of the heathlands, and we try and encourage them to do that. The proposed mitigation costs are set out in the report at paragraph 6, and over the 5-year period, it is estimated income should be approximately £1.42 million. These strategies enable both Dorset and BCP councils to grant planning permission for new homes within 5 kilometres of heathland, within that buffer. And it is very important, therefore, that we do have this SPD in place and adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, sorry. So my concern is, if you've got the paper, is it says use of class 2. Now, residential institutions such as boarding schools, I would agree that they're unlikely to be people going out to use it. So whether you allow them within a 400 metre, I don't have a problem. That depends. But residential colleges and training centres are, you're saying depends, but you're saying that university managed student accommodation is no. Now, I would suggest that residential colleges and training centres have the same sort of population as a university managed student accommodation, and as such you are going to have the same impact from both of those areas, and therefore I'm concerned that we're saying for one it depends and for the other we're saying no. So that's the first question. I don't know if you want to answer that and then I can carry on.
Okay, I'm going to ask Scotland to answer that.
To be honest, I think the category depends is adequate, because it will be each one will be taken on its merits, won't it? Depends on the size of the institution or the scale of it, how many people are involved, etc., etc. So I think
Well,
depends is giving us the degree of flexibility we require.
I would dispute that, Chairman, if I may, because I mean, if we're talking about the use of houses in an area, we're saying that a house which potentially could have 1 or 2 people in it, and we're saying that a residential college which you could have upwards of 50 people on, it depends. I think it should be a black and white in this case. I think you should revisit that class 2 and say no.
Is this the same as it was before in the previous document? Do we know? Has it changed?
I believe it's the same as it was before.
That's what I'm thinking. It's the same as it was before. I don't think anybody's changed it. I'm not saying it can't, but I'm just saying that I think it's come forward from previous documents.
Yeah, no, it's. Well, I just recall that certainly some of the meetings we've had where residential colleges have been refused permission because they have a similar footprint. That's my only comment on that one. The other bit concerns I have are that we've had instances recently with particularly the Talbot Heath area where people have been putting in structures and they've decimated the land that's been used for, I think it was the smooth lizards, where they've dug the ditch despite being told that they can't go there. I know I've been contacted by people from the Talbot Village Heathlands area in particular because they're very concerned about that. And I would like to see some form of stricter enforcement. Now, how you do it, I'm not particularly going to suggest you do it. It's just I think it's something that we need to look at. And my final comment is with with my environmental hat on. We've said that we have a climate and ecological emergency, yet there's no aspiration in here that we should be looking at trying to increase, if possible and where possible, the heathlands. I mean, we're trying to protect what we've got, but surely we should have an aspiration. Not that we're going to convert everything into heathlands, but that we should be, where it's appropriate, we should be looking at trying to increase the heathlands.
Okay, thank you. Certainly on the on the enforcement, I'm aware of that issue that you raised, and I do know it was looked at, and I believe that at the present time, due to the time of year, the development was stopped, and I think it's being looked at. That's just that one in particular, and I think when issues are raised such as that, then they are seriously looked at by the planning department and by enforcement. That's my view, and I was made aware of that one and made sure that it was looked at. So that's that issue.
Thank you for that assurance.
As far as the climate emergency, I mean, in paragraph 12, the feedback that we got did refer to the Climate Change and Emergency Action Plan, and it does say that these amendments are all minor and in nature and improve the clarity of the SPD. So I think we have taken that on board, is what I'm saying within the report here. I don't know if you want to say any more on that, but that's my impression.
Chairman, if I may, it's the ecological side I'm talking about rather than the climate change. They're the two different things. The climate change is one thing. The ecological is the fact that we are trying to preserve the ecology of the area, such as very specifically here the heathlands. And what we're trying to do here is we're saying that we have built up, we've lost, we've cut down. I think we're down to something like 17% of the heathlands we had in Victorian times. Surely we should have an aspiration that we look at not only maintaining it but trying to increase it if we can. Because hopefully, the ideal situation would be we don't have to preserve it because we've got sufficient that we're back in a state that we're covering. We talk about planting millions of trees to help the climate. Surely that's what we should be doing with the environment here and the ecology side of it. That's what I'm saying. If we could have an aspiration, I'm not saying that we should increase the heathlands population as a size by 1% a year or 1% every 5 years. I'm saying we should have in this an aspiration that says where it is suitable and possible that we look at increasing the heathlands.
Thank you. I think we could perhaps take that on board.
Yeah,
Do you have any comments on
that? I mean, my initial reaction is, that would be a laudable aim. I think we do spend a lot of time and energy actually just holding the line, if you like, protecting the heathlands. It's quite difficult to extend them. But we can look at that if that comes forward as a recommendation from M&S. We can look at that at the cabinet meeting to respond more formally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chair. I want to agree with Councillor Anderson there in terms of the aims of looking to extend the heathland. I think that would be kind of wonderful and a real achievement if we were able to go beyond just keeping what we have. I've equally been contacted about the issues around Talbot, and whilst part of the development was stopped and a trench was still dug, which would have had an impact on the slow worms at that point in time. However, my kind of main question, I guess, was slightly different to that. It was looking at why there is a cap and what the thinking was behind the cap in the admin fee. An admin fee will be charged at a minimum charge of £75 and capped to a limit of £1,000 per contribution type, which is point 13, summary of financial implications. And I was just wondering what the thinking was behind the cap there. It's page 96, if that helps.
Yeah. I think it's essentially to give the any developers the certainty of how much they're going to have to pay. So it's just for convenience.
I think it can just be, on and on and on. There's got to be some idea, otherwise the things become unviable, I believe. That was the idea, I think.
Is that okay, Councillor Maitland?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, right. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was of great concern the nature of developers breaching the ecological side of things. What was of concern to me, looking into the backstory, is that developers hired their own ecological advisors, and apparently we had a difference of opinion between the council's advisors and the developers. Is there any reassurance that that won't happen again? Because if one developer does it and then still steamrollers through because their paid expert says, hey, no problem, it's just a few slow worms, then what's to stop another developer doing the same? Do we have any sort of opportunity here to make sure that there's a punitive hit to developers that actually disregard the supplementary planning development guidelines?
Who wishes to respond?
I'll kick off.
Yes, Councillor Cotton.
To be perfectly honest, I don't know the details of the case that's been referred to, so I can't really comment on what a landowner or a developer has or hasn't done. So I would need to find out more details so I can actually, get a better understanding of the case. But as a matter of principle, yes, of course, we want to protect the heathlands wherever possible. And it would be a matter of the planning department to investigate and to
put out any enforcement action if that was deemed necessary.
Just add to that normally if it is a development that's coming forward under a planning application, there is obviously a consultation, and one of the main consultees, certainly in these sort of cases, within the buffer zone of 5 kilometres will be Natural England. And it may be that a developer's has an expert or whatever that puts forward a point of view, but normally Natural England may have a differing point of view or may have the same point of view, and quite often much weight is put on the response of Natural England. So that is a bit of, I don't know what the word is, more like not a buffer for us, that Natural England really have not quite the last say on it, but they are the people that are taken notice of with more weight, I would say, if there's a difference of opinion between them and a developer's expert. That's my thoughts on it.
Farquhar?
The late response, or the supplemental papers which came out today, apparently they came from America States. Have we got any explanation for why this consultation period sort of fell down? And the follow-up to that is there anything in there of concern to you as the portfolio holder for their, perhaps, shall we say, late feedback?
The reason it was late was it wasn't late actually, they did submit it, but unfortunately they submitted it to an old Poole Council email address, and it kind of somehow got lost in the system. By the time it came to light, it was just out of the consultation period. So it was decided in the interests of transparency that we would like to make sure that you saw it and it was brought forward. So that is why that is late. They did actually put it forward, but it's somewhere, it went into the ether somewhere. Having looked at it, I mean, there are quite a few issues. I don't have anything particular that as a bother to me as such. I mean, there are a lot of comments that have been taken into account, and if you look at the officer's response on there, they have responded to all of them. No, I don't have an issue with it. I don't know about you.
No.
Thank you. Councillor Fear?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a small footnote comment on this, where obviously going forward, certain areas beyond the mitigation zone could still have certain types of development, and I think it's just to leave for the Cabinet member and obviously you, Chair, as well, when you go to Cabinet on Wednesday, that I do believe plans need to be drawn up on these certain areas that can have certain types of development on, which actually are amenities for local residents and not money making from a third party. I just think there's definitely scope there for the administration to look at that and bring these sort of ideas to the fore, because there's certain land that would not be in anyone's eye a heathland or protection, but because of certain boundaries, there are certain areas that are left unattended, unloved, which should be used and could be used for amenities for local residents. So it's really just leaving that in the air for you to take away. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
One last comment, Councillor Anderson.
I was going to make a recommendation, Chairman.
Yes, I was actually going to come to that because
Okay, that's fine. I shall wait for you to
just very quickly summing up the discussion that has just gone on, and thank you. I think there were some very interesting points raised. I think there was a point raised by Councillor Anderson, which I believe Councillor Maidman broadly supported, which could probably translate into the following recommendation, which is that BCP Council should have an aspiration to increase land that is designated with heathland status where it is possible.
Acidic heathlands, if you want.
Acidic heathlands.
Acidic heathland status. And I think the other recommendation, which was what Councillor Fear has actually just touched on, which is to say that there should be some form of flexibility, if I understand it, that whilst a piece of land falls foul of the 400-metre rule because of heathlands, that nonetheless consideration should be given if it were just to be used as amenity space for local residents. Is that correct?
If I may just jump in, Chair, amenity space and any development that, I'm trying to think of certain wording now for this, so certain buildings that would house residents with special certain needs, incapacitated people, where actually certain parts of this doesn't come under, I think would be good. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, I mean, there's two issues. The aspiration to increase the heathland status. Whilst that is, I agree with the aspiration, but I'm not sure that this supplementary planning document is the right place to put it, because this provides a framework on which to make based planning decisions. And, all planning applications will have conditions associated with it, and if it requires compliance with this document, that's where it should be. So it's very difficult to imagine how this document can be used as a vehicle to increase the aspirations for additional space. That's got to come somewhere else, probably in a local plan, I would have thought. And the second point is the form of flexibility in terms of amenity space. Again, that's much more of a local plan issue about the allocation of spaces and areas for certain types of activity. Whereas, this is a definitive document that is used to make planning decisions, as it is, rather than promote some kind of aspirations for a different use of land. So I'm not. Whilst I understand the spirit behind these recommendations, I don't think they actually should be in this document. Thank you, Chair.
Your reading of the document, but not for inclusion.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Councillor Bartlett. They're very useful. I think that the two recommendations... Oh, sorry, Councillor Phipps.
I could just comment on that. What I was going to say was that I don't have a problem with the recommendation as such, and I think the ideas are very good. However, this is a joint document with Dorset Council, and if we want to make amendments to it, it will have to be agreed by them as well. It will have to go through their cabinet and it has to go to full council in both full councils. And it is a supplementary planning document. And I was going to say that I think the local plan, but you said it before me, is probably the place to do something with the ideas and the recommendations that are coming forward rather than this document. And I'm sure we can take that on board in one way or another. But that's just my comment on it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. I think in light of that, I think that if the board is agreeable, that we will take those forward as comments to say that these were some of the comments from the board. And whilst it is not within this document to actually incorporate those comments or recommendations, nonetheless, they are valid comments which they would like Cabinet to take on board, particularly when the local plan, within the context of the local plan. Are we board members? Are we happy to proceed along those lines?
So is this a recommendation or a summary of comments?
I think it's a summary of comments, because I think we can't really make a recommendation because, as Councillor Bartlett has pointed out, it doesn't really sit within this document. Mm-hmm. Are we content to proceed in that manner? Yes? Okay. All right. We've agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Phipps and Mr. Cott.
So now on to meeting dates.
Okay, members. We now move on to...
I can take you through this.
Well, actually, it's not numbered. It just says A and B. Over the page, you've got future meeting dates. And future meeting dates for the forthcoming municipal year. So I will hand you over to Ms. Marshall to talk us through.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'll be brief. You've got a list of your meeting dates which are already agreed. There are now venues assigned to those because there was a discussion around venues before. So if, I think as ever, if it's more appropriate to hold your meetings in a certain venue, then that decision is taken based on agenda. But if you're happy to agree to this circulation of venues for the time being, that would be helpful for us in planning purposes. And your next meeting is due to be on the 20th of April with a venue TBC. But again, I'd suggest we keep that under review and just communicate with you as appropriate.
Councillor Farquhar?
Chair, just for clarification, there's these dates which have already previously been agreed. Does that allow that buffer zone between us and Cabinet?
Yes, that is built in from May onwards. There was an agreement for that to take place from May. The only exception you'll see would be your June meeting date, where you won't have the buffer zone because the Cabinet meeting date has since changed. But I think there's a view from the Chairman that just keep your dates as they are. So that this is the dates that were agreed at the council meeting when the annual calendar went through.
Thank you for that. And also, further comment is to say that obviously things are moving and changing as we speak, because Chief Executive had to go and take yet another call to do with relating to coronavirus. So whilst these are the dates, and if members are happy to support them in principle, it's just to note, as Mr. Marshall has said, that they could well be subject to change. Okay, so members, are we happy to accept them on those principles? Yeah. Yes? Okay, thank you very much. Right, so that concludes the first meeting. We reconvene again at 6 o'clock. So if I could please ask members to be here so that we can actually have a prompt 6 o'clock start. And the reason for that is because we've got two rather substantial items in the next meeting, and also I want to give us sufficient time to actually listen to the update for coronavirus. So I will see everyone back here for a 6 o'clock prompt start. Thank you very much.